23 centuries ago, a man sitting in a modest ashram in northern India wrote something that modern wealth management companies charge thousands of dollars per hour to teach their clients, without ever acknowledging that every single principle they are selling was already documented in perfect detail in a Sanskrit text written more than 2000 years before they were born. What this man wrote, Chanakya, in the Arthashastra, is so precise, so complete, and so structurally correct as a description of how wealth is built and protected that the economist John Kenneth Galbraith, when he first encountered it, said that it represented the most sophisticated economic thinking of the ancient world, and what Chanakya wrote specifically about where a person should hold their wealth. Yokoiza and how they should structure the containers of their financial life is the exact opposite of what the majority of hard-working Hindu families in the diaspora are doing right now. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what Chanakya's rule was, not in the watered down, paraphrased version that circulates on social media. The precise structural principle from the Arthashastra itself, translated into practical action that you can begin today, in whatever financial situation you currently occupy. By the time this teaching is complete, you will understand exactly why your financial life may be more fragile than it looks on the surface, and you will have the specific framework that Chanakya designed, tested on the largest economy in the ancient world, and proved across the 40 years he managed the Maurya Empire's treasury to make it genuinely structurally resilient. I am Guruji Raman Sharma. I was born and raised in Varanasi, trained at Banaras Hindu University in Vedic philosophy and Sanskrit, and formed in the deeper dimensions of this knowledge by my grandfather Pandit Vishnu Sharma, who studied the Arthashastra alongside the Vedic texts of prosperity, and who treated Chanakya not as a historical figure, but as a living teacher whose words were as precise and as immediately applicable as the day they were written. For more than 45 years, I have studied the intersection between the devotional Vedic teachings on prosperity and Chanakya's practical financial science. What I have come to understand through this study is something that very few people appreciate. Chanakya and the Vedic rishis were not talking about two different subjects from two different worlds. They were describing the same reality, the flow of abundance through human life, from two different angles. The rishis described it in the language of the divine. Chanakya described it in the language of the administrator. Together, they constitute the most complete financial education ever assembled in the ancient world. What I'm about to share represents one of the 9 sacred laws of Lakshmi that I've spent a lifetime organizing from both the Vedic tradition and Chanakya's Arthashastra. Today, I'm sharing two of these 9 laws, laws that address the structural architecture of how a family holds and protects its wealth. Most people who struggle financially are not struggling because they are not earning enough, or not working hard enough, or not praying enough. They are struggling because the structure through which they are holding their financial life has a design flaw that makes it fragile in a way that no amount of additional income or additional effort can permanently overcome. Chanakya identified this design flaw 23 centuries ago. He called it the single vessel problem, and his solution is what I want to give you today. Write in the comments right now, Om Shrim Mahalakshmiye Namaha. As you write it, understand that Lakshmi and Chanakya's Arthashastra are not opposites. Lakshmi governs the flow of abundance in the divine dimension. The Arthashastra governs the structures through which that abundance is received and protected in the human dimension. Both are necessary. One without the other is incomplete. I want to tell you about an evening that changed my understanding of money permanently. I was 17 years old. My grandfather had asked me, as he often did, to sit with him after the evening puja, when the house was quiet and the Ganga outside our window was visible only as a moving darkness below the lights of the Ghats. He had been reading the Arthashastra that afternoon, specifically the section on what Chanakya calls Kosha, the treasury, and he placed the book in front of me and pointed to a specific passage. He said, Chanakya built the largest treasury in the history of ancient India. Yep, and he fed an empire of 32% of global wealth from this treasury. And the first thing he says about how a treasury must be constructed is not how to fill it, it is how to structure it. He identified 7 separate streams of revenue for the Mauryan state: mines, forest, agriculture, trade, taxation, manufacturing, and service charges. 7 completely independent streams. And he was explicit: the treasury of a state that depends on fewer than 3 streams of income is in a state of chronic vulnerability, because the failure of any single stream will be felt immediately and catastrophically across the entire structure. My grandfather looked at me and asked, "Now tell me, how many streams of income does our family have?" I thought about it. My father's government salary, that was one. I thought harder. That was still one. My grandfather said, "This is why most families in India and most families in the diaspora, regardless of how hard they work, how intelligent they are, how devout they are, live in a state of chronic financial fragility. Not because they're doing anything wrong, because they have built their entire financial life on a single vessel. And a single vessel, no matter how strong it appears, can be broken in a moment." He paused and then he said something I have never forgotten. Chanakya did not design the Mauryan treasury for an emperor. He designed it as a universal principle of financial resilience. The emperor just had the largest household. The principle applies equally to the family of 5 in New Jersey and the family of 4 in London. Now, let me speak to what this means in your life right now, because I know where most of you are, and I know that this is not an abstract conversation. You are working, perhaps one income in the household, perhaps two, perhaps a salary from an employer, perhaps a business. You have a savings account, probably one. You have whatever retirement account your employer has set up. And you have the sense, which you cannot fully dismiss, no matter how hard you work, that the entire structure of your financial life is resting on something precarious. If your job disappears tomorrow, a layoff, a health crisis, a change in your employer's circumstances, the entire structure collapses. The salary stops. The mortgage payment does not stop. The children's school fees do not stop. The anxiety about all of this is not irrational, it is completely accurate. Your financial structure, built on a single vessel, is exactly as fragile as your anxiety tells you it is. We are also living through an economic period that is making this fragility visible in a particularly acute way. Interest rates, the cost of housing, the cost of food, the uncertainty of employment in multiple sectors. These are creating pressure that reveals the structural weakness in how most families have organized their financial lives. The single vessel problem is not new, but in periods of economic stress, it becomes dangerous in ways that are very real and very immediate. This is precisely the moment when Chanakya's structural principles are most relevant and most urgently needed. I also want to address something that I believe is a significant problem in how Vedic prosperity teachings are often presented. Many teachers, by including some who present themselves as experts in this tradition, have reduced the relationship between the divine and financial abundance to a purely devotional equation. Pray harder, perform more rituals, and the money will come. I want to be clear about what the complete Vedic tradition actually says, because my grandfather was very precise about this. The Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter teaches that devoted action, yajna, is what creates the conditions for divine abundance to manifest. Not devotion alone, not action alone. Devoted action, action performed with full awareness, full intention, and full alignment with Dharma. Chanakya's structural principles are the action dimension of this equation. The lamp ritual, the mantra sadhana, the vastu alignment of the home, these are the devotional dimension. Now, to practice one without the other is to build a house with a beautiful roof and no foundation. The Arthashastra identifies what it calls kosha as one of the 7 essential elements of a state. The treasury, the financial foundation upon which everything else depends. And in its discussion of kosha, Chanakya makes a principle explicit: that most modern financial education has reinvented without acknowledging its ancient source. The principle that no treasury, no financial foundation is structurally sound if it draws from fewer than multiple, distinct, and independent sources. An economy that depends on a single sector is in a state of permanent systemic risk. An individual whose entire income comes from a single employer is in a state of permanent systemic risk. An individual whose entire savings sits in a single institution is in a state of permanent systemic risk. This is not Chanakya's opinion. This is Chanakya's observation of how every empire in the ancient world that concentrated its treasury in a single source eventually collapsed, and how every empire that built genuine diversity of revenue streams built genuine resilience. This is the first of the two laws I am sharing today, and I want to give it its full practical expression. Chanakya called it what we might now call the doctrine of diversified sources. In the Arthashastra, Book 2, his description of the Mauryan state's economic administration enumerates seven distinct streams of state revenue: income from crown property and royal enterprises, income from agriculture and cultivation of state lands, income from mining and the exploitation of natural resources, income from trade and commerce, income from taxation of private transactions, income from service charges and fees, and income from miscellaneous sources, including fines and market levies. Seven streams. And Chanakya was explicit that the superintendent of the treasury, what we might now call the finance minister, was responsible for ensuring that no single stream constituted more than one third of total state income. Because a stream that constitutes more than one third of income, when it fails, takes the treasury with it. Translated to your household, no single source of income should constitute more than one third of your total household income if you wish to achieve what Chanakya calls stairya, the stability and permanence of financial security. This is not a call to abandon your primary income. Your salary, your business, your primary professional activity is essential and must be protected and grown with full attention. But Chanakya is asking you to look at your financial life as a system and ask, what is the second stream? What is the third stream? They do not need to be equal in size to your primary income. They need to exist. Three streams, of which one is large and two are small, creates a fundamentally different kind of resilience than one large stream alone. If the large stream is disrupted, the household does not collapse. It is stressed, but it does not collapse. And a household under stress can recover. A household that has collapsed cannot recover. It can only rebuild from zero. The Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, in its description of different kinds of knowledge, makes a distinction that maps directly onto this principle. It describes sattvic knowledge as the knowledge that sees the one in the many and the many in the one, the understanding of how individual elements are part of a unified, interconnected system. The person who sees their financial life sattvically sees it as a system, not as a single transaction. They see how a second income stream they build today, even if small, is not merely additional money, it is structural protection for everything else they have built. It is the difference between a table with one leg and a table with four. How do you begin? Chanakya's guidance in the Arthashastra is more practically useful here than most modern financial advice because he is not speaking abstractly about portfolio theory. He's speaking about the actual categories of productive activity from which income naturally flows. He identifies the first category as what he calls Raja Karma, the king's own labor, the application of your primary skills in your primary domain. This is your job or your business. The second category he identifies is what he calls Bhumi, land and property, the productive assets that generate income independently of your active daily labor. In the modern context, this translates to income generating property or any form of investment that produces a return without requiring your daily presence. The third category he identifies is Vanik path, the merchant's path, commercial activity, trade. In the modern context, this could be a small side business, freelance work in your professional domain, or any form of commercial activity that draws on your skills outside your primary employment. The fourth category is what he calls vidya, knowledge, the monetization of expertise that you have accumulated through your years of experience and study. In the modern context, teaching, consulting, writing, creating, building on what you already know, you do not need to pursue all four simultaneously. What Chanakya asks is that you pursue more than one. Begin with one additional stream, the one that is most naturally accessible to you, given your skills, your time, and your current circumstances. Build it to a point of genuine, if modest, stability before you begin building a third. The process is incremental, the principle is absolute. And here is the teaching that goes alongside the first. It that Chanakya presents not as a separate principle, but as the natural consequence of the first. You must hold your wealth in multiple vessels, not one. This is the second of the two laws I'm sharing today. Not only must wealth flow in from multiple sources, it must be distributed, held, and stored across multiple separate structures in such a way that the failure of any single structure does not threaten the whole. Chanakya describes this with characteristic precision in the Arthashastra. He maintained for the Mauryan state three distinct categories of treasury: the active treasury, which was the working fund for the daily operations of the state; the reserve treasury, which was the emergency fund, and which Chanakya specified must be kept completely separate from the active treasury, held in a different physical location. Say, and must under no circumstances be touched except in the specific categories of national emergency that he defined explicitly; and the buried treasure, what he called the nidai, the hidden store, which was the deepest reserve, positioned at the extreme boundaries of the kingdom, and which was not to be touched except in the event of absolute catastrophic failure of both the active and reserve treasuries. Three categories, three separate structures, three completely independent vessels. And the key feature of this system, the feature that most people who know Chanakya's financial teaching miss entirely, is not the existence of the three categories. It is the rule governing the relationships between them. Chanakya was explicit. The reserve treasury is never to be used for the ordinary operations of the state, and no matter how convenient it would be to do so. And the need high, the deepest reserve, is never to be touched except in catastrophic emergency, no matter how great the temptation to rationalize an exception. The moment you allow the reserve to be used for ordinary needs, it is no longer a reserve, it is a delayed expenditure. And a delayed expenditure provides no structural protection at all. Applied to your household today, this means three things. First, build an active account, the working money of your household, the money that flows in and out for ordinary daily life. This is the money you spend. Second, completely separate from this, build a reserve, what the modern financial world calls an emergency fund, but which Chanakya understood at a much deeper structural level. His reserve treasury was not simply 3 months of expenses in a savings account. It was a completely separate entity with its own rules of access, rules that you establish in advance, in writing, before you are ever in the emotional state that might tempt you to use it for something that does not genuinely qualify. The most important work of building a reserve is not building the money. It is establishing in advance the clear and precise conditions under which the money may be touched. Everything else, convenience, opportunity, temptation, does not qualify. The third vessel, the needy, is what Chanakya described as the foundation of the family's long term security across generations, not accessible for use by the current generation except in the most extreme of emergencies. This is the wealth you are building not for this year's expenses or even this decade's security, but for the structural foundation of your family's position across time. In the modern context, this is the long term investment account, the retirement fund, the asset that compounds quietly over decades, and that your rules of access protect from the short term thinking that would otherwise consume it. The Arthashastra describes this category of wealth with the Sanskrit term sanchita, the accumulated, the gathered over time. the wealth whose power lies precisely in the fact that it has never been spent. My grandfather used an analogy for this three vessel system that I have shared with every family I have ever worked with because I have never found a better one. He said, think of a river system. Ada, the river that flows through your village every day. That is your active account. It is abundant, it is constant, and it serves all the immediate needs of life. Behind the village, there's a lake fed by the river, always full, always quiet. That is your reserve. It does not flow through the village every day. But when the river runs low in a dry season, the lake is there with enough water to carry the village through. And above the lake, fed by the rains that fall on the highest mountains, there is a glacier. The glacier does not empty into the lake every year. It gives slowly, steadily, over centuries. That is the needy, the deep reserve that nourishes the lake, that nourishes the river, that nourishes the village, through time scales that no individual crisis can reach. You do not need to build all three vessels simultaneously. What you must do is begin. The active account you already have. Take it as simply your bank account. The reserve. Begin today to move a small but consistent percentage of every inflow into a completely separate account in a completely separate institution if possible, governed by rules of access you define in advance. The Nidhai. Begin with whatever small and consistent investment toward long term compounding that your current situation allows. The amounts are not the point at this stage, the architecture is the point. The three vessel structure, once established even at modest scale, creates a qualitatively different kind of financial security than any amount of money in a single vessel can provide. Like, I want to close with something the Bhagavad Gita says in the third chapter that maps precisely onto everything Chanakya teaches about the structure of wealth. Lord Krishna says, the world is bound by action, accepting only actions performed for the sake of yajna, sacred action, purposeful action, action aligned with cosmic order. The person who acts for yajna is liberated by their action. The person who acts only for immediate result becomes enslaved by their action. Chanakya's financial principles are yajna in the domain of money. When you build multiple income streams, you are not simply trying to earn more money. You are aligning your financial life with the cosmic principle of diversity and resilience that governs every healthy system in nature. When you build three separate vessels and honor the rules that govern each, you are not simply being financially disciplined. You are creating the structural conditions for Lakshmi to establish herself permanently in your household. Because Lakshmi, as the Vedic texts consistently describe her, does not remain in a household where financial life is built on a single fragile foundation. She remains where the structure is worthy of her presence. This is the structural dimension of the nine sacred laws of Lakshmi. The devotional practices I share in other teachings open the channel through which Lakshmi's energy flows. These structural principles from Chanakya are the vessels that hold what flows. Without the open channel, no amount of structural preparation will fill the vessels. Without the vessels, no amount of open channel will allow what flows to accumulate. The complete system requires both. Now, in my next teaching, I will share the Chanakya principle that directly answers the question most families never think to ask. How do you protect the wealth you are building from the specific internal threats that Chanakya identified as more dangerous than any external calamity? He lists them with uncomfortable precision in the Arthashastra, and every single one of them is as present in modern diaspora families as it was in the households of the Maurya Empire 23 centuries ago. His answer is one of the most important teachings in the entire tradition of Vedic financial wisdom, and it is one that almost no one discusses publicly. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Write Om Shreem Mahalakshmiye Namaha in the comments. In the and if someone in your family or community is building their entire financial life on a single vessel, and you know exactly who I'm speaking about, share this teaching with them today. The act of sharing Vedic wisdom is itself, in the tradition of my grandfather and every teacher before him, the most immediate and reliable way to activate the law of dharmic return in your own financial life. May Goddess Lakshmi in her infinite wisdom and grace, illuminate the structure of your financial life and guide you toward the architecture that is worthy of her permanent presence. May Lord Ganesha remove every obstacle, internal and external, that stands between your sincere effort and the enduring prosperity your family deserves. Bokasan may by the wisdom of her Chanakya and the grace of the Vedic rishis work together in your life as they were always meant to, as one complete teaching, practical and sacred, material and divine. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.